I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Hey folks, welcome back to the program. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania with a special guest today on a Saturday. Very kind of him to give up his time here. Looks like he's traveling. Doesn't look like he's in his business suite there. So we're just going to talk today to Dawie Roodt, someone I've never had a chance to chat with. And I apologize for a couple minutes being tardy. That's entirely on me. I can get a little carried away in conversation. Dawie asked me a simple question, and 9 minutes later, I was like, oh, we better go online. So my apologies. So Dawie, goeiedag, hoe gaan het?
Goeienaand, baie goed, baie dankie.
All right, well, yes, good evening. It is evening for you. That's right, 6 p.m., but it's afternoon for me. So, yeah, that's sometimes we get the time differences there. Look, I invited you on. I've always wanted to talk to you about a number of things. You're a very well-known economist, but you obviously know the South African economic situation. I want to talk about the impacts of all that's going on with South Africa. You know, a few weeks back, Newsroom Africa lied about me. Now, they apologized to AfriForum. I saw that yesterday, but they haven't apologized to me because they had Amanda Gross on their programs in Stellenbosch, and she was talking several weeks ago about how the sanctions the United States has placed on South Africa, and I did a video and said, excuse me, what sanctions? There are no sanctions on South Africa. Please tell me what the sanctions are. The only actions taken by President Trump were an executive order and was to cease giving foreign aid, which is not a sanction. That's our money to give to people, and we're not giving it to anybody. And the only reason you've been singled out is because your politicians whined about it. The whole world stopped getting it for 90 days, and you made a big stink. Now you don't get it forever. That can change. And I said the other thing was this refugee offer. That is not a sanction. That's an offer. We offer refugee status to the Uyghurs, to the Rohingya, to people from Sudan, from Somalia. So, you know, get over yourself. I mean, I didn't say that with her, but so then Newsroom Africa a week later, broadcast said a former colonel misled people with disinformation, saying Professor Hose, and she started talking about land. I didn't say anything about land. I was talking about that. So anyway, the point of the story there I was getting at is that there's a lot of misinformation going on, and that's part of it. There are no sanctions in South Africa. There is, however, a bill that was introduced this week, shockingly, well, maybe not so shockingly, by Ronnie Jackson, the representative from Texas 13th District, who was President Trump's personal physician as a Navy surgeon in the last administration. This bill, which doesn't have a number yet because it hasn't gone in, it's been drafted, says sanctions against ANC leaders. Now we're talking about sanctions, but until now, we've not been talking about any sanctions, particularly economic sanctions, because for years, Zimbabwe has gotten away with lying about Zimbabwe, claiming the U.S. has sanctions on Zimbabwe. There are no sanctions in Zimbabwe. There are sanctions on human rights abusers and leaders in the ZANU-PF, as well as state-owned enterprises that they draw money from. But you can invest, well, I can invest in Zimbabwe. I can move to Zimbabwe. My government doesn't stop me. Anyway, so that's a long intro. I want to talk to you today about the issues with South Africa, because it's not sanctions, but what's going on could be very detrimental to the welfare and economic well-being of South Africans, particularly the loss of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which in effect has just happened, even though it hasn't ended. Trump's 30% tariff. So there's so much to unpack here. Dawie, welcome to the program. I'll let you get started, and you can address any one of those 1,000 things I just mentioned.
Thank you very much for the invite. Maybe I should apologize for my very informal attire that I'm wearing, but I'm kind of in a very beautiful coastal town, so I'm enjoying myself, and I'm going to have a couple of beers a little bit later. All right, let's get going about what's going on South Africa. I'm a South African economist. I specialize in fiscal stuff, fiscal policies. I worked at the South African Central Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, for a couple of years, so I got a little bit of background on the monetary policy as well. And we've established a company called the Fishing Group about 22 years ago, and it's a financial services company. So what's going on in South Africa? When people talk about debt, we usually talk about the central government debt. But the ANC has been in charge in South Africa for 30 years now, and that 30 years, especially the past 15 years, the ANC dominated, because we have a so-called coalition government, or government of national unity at the moment. But the ANC has been the most destructive force that we've ever seen in South Africa. And when I talk about destructive force, I mean at just about all levels that has to do with government. If you go to the local authorities, and I can give you all the numbers if you want to, but we're talking about something like more than 70% of the local authorities do have qualified audits. They are badly run. The same goes for the state-owned enterprises, like the electricity utility, for example, is the best known one. It's called Eskom. But it's not only Eskom, it's the railroads as well, the airports, the defense industry, just about all of those have been run into the ground financially and operationally. And then if you talk about the national accounts, the debt levels in South Africa has become unsustainable. And it just keeps on going up and it just keeps on going up. Now, the reason the ANC government stands for four things, and people must understand this. The first one that the ANC stands for, they stand for a certain ideology. Now, I say this with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek because there are so many people in the ANC that do not stand for any ideology. The only ideology that they stand for is to align my own pocket. That is actually the ideology that they stand for. But the ideology of the ANC, let's call it a leftish kind of ideology. Remember, they are in coalition, or they are in partnership with the South African Communist Party. So the ideological base is, well, leftish, you can call it communist, you can call it socialist, they call it developmental, but it's somewhere on the left. That's the first thing that the ANC stands for. Secondly, what the ANC stands for, because of this ideology that they have certain policies. And I can give you some example of some of these policies, but basically what it comes down to, they want to centralize control wherever they can. And there are many examples of that, and we can go through those as well. Now, the ideology is wrong and the policies is wrong in a modern society. The ideology is somewhere locked in some in the 1920s. The third thing that the ANC stands for is what they call cadre deployment, which means that you appoint your people that are loyal to the ANC and all positions, that powerful positions. And there's another name for cadre deployment, and I call it incompetence. And the reason why I call it incompetence, because they appoint people because of their loyalties and not because they can't do their job. And the result of that was things like, for example, the state-owned enterprises and everything has been mismanaged. And then the fourth thing that the ANC stand for, they stand for corruption quite often. So those are the characteristics of the ANC government. Now, the South African economy used to be a very, very modern economy. I've analyzed the South African economy, compared it to all sort of things. I compared it to the rich world, compared it to the emerging economies. South Africa was by far the biggest economy on the African continent. We generated more electricity than most countries in the world. We have more tar roads in South Africa. We had more tar roads in South Africa than the rest of Africa combined. And you can just compare South Africa to where we were 30 years ago and where we are today. South Africa is a shadow of where it used to be. If you talk in terms of our relationship with the United States, there are a couple of things that are important. South Africa's most important trading partner are the Chinese. We trade a lot with the Chinese. The second most important trading partner are the Americans, followed by the Europeans and a couple of smaller countries. Those are our trading partners. But when you talk about funding, there's a difference between who you trade with and people that actually fund certain deficits in your country. One important deficit is a so-called fiscal deficit, and that's where the Minister of Finance borrows most of his money. And the bulk of borrowing from foreign sources are from the Americans and from the Europeans. South Africa's financial markets are still very, very well managed. The South African Central Bank, the Reserve Bank, is still doing an excellent job. The banks are very well managed. The financial markets are very liquid. Our currency, the rand, is one of the most traded currencies in the world. But I'm afraid for the rest of the economy, South Africa basically became deindustrialized the last couple of decades. On a per capita basis, we are poorer today than 15 years ago. And I can give you all sort of numbers and more numbers. So what we have, what is currently happening in South Africa, I think there are two transitions, two very important things happening. The one is we're going through, a slow motion financial crisis. And if we continue in the current trajectory, we are going to get into very, very deep trouble. The second thing that is happening, we are going through a political transition as well. The ANC government has been losing a lot in terms of voter outcome, the elections, and I think they will continue to lose out over the next couple of elections. Next year, we've got a local authority election. In 3-4 years' time, we've got another national election. That is, or maybe before that. But the ANC government, without a doubt, is losing out quite big time. Maybe, let's just give some credit where it's due. The ANC government accepted the outcome of the elections last year, despite the fact that they really lost big time in the general election. So that is something that is quite good. So the point I want to make is South Africa is gradually becoming a real mature democracy, and that is certainly good. And a couple of other things are still working. I mentioned the South African Central Bank, and I also mentioned, I did not yet, but the South African press is also quite independent and doing a relatively good job. And of course, our judiciary is also quite independent and also doing a relatively good job. But the problem in South Africa is not economic, I would say. The problem in South Africa is political. And the political problem that we have in South Africa is an ANC government that has been mismanaging and has been running the South African economy into the ground financially and operationally. So how's that for a bit of a background on what's going on in South Africa?
Well, yeah, that's a good start. See, we won't agree on everything, but we will agree on a lot of things. One of which you just said that I'll come back to it is about the press. I don't think the press is doing a good job at all. In 2018, I participated in the Great Decisions Lecture Series, which is run by the Ivy League schools here so Harvard, Yale, and so on. The Army War College is a participant in that, and they pick the subjects. A board picks the subjects for the year. The subject that year was South Africa's fragile democracy. I was a little reticent to give that briefing. It's available online. A lot of my viewers have watched it. A little reticent to give that briefing because I didn't really think that the democracy was that fragile. It was in trouble, but not fragile in 2018. And I talked about it. One of the things I said that's been great is that the courts have been relatively independent and the press has done a great job with investigative journalism. At that time, the Daily Maverick with its investigations and some others were pretty independent. I have very different opinion in 2025, and it's developed over the times. I don't find the press to be independent or objective at all. In fact, every time I turn around, they're getting things wrong. That's one of the reasons why my program has grown so much, because I expose the op-ed disguised as news in their daily reports and the misleading statements they have. And there are some more egregious actors than others, but all of them, in my view, in South Africa, are currently guilty of this, so whether they're broadcast or print. And as far as the courts, I trusted the courts until the North Gauteng court ruled that the Tourism Relief Fund during COVID was legal and didn't conflict with the Constitution. I've read the Constitution. It was unconstitutional. That was overturned by the Supreme Court of Appeal, but by then all the money was exhausted, which is what they wanted to happen. So, and now we see the hate speech. You can't say the K word. You go to jail as a convicted felon, but you can sing and kill people. And so I'm not sold on the courts being independent either. But go ahead.
Let me just comment on that. There's a difference between being objective and being independent. So I'm not saying the South African press.
Okay, fair enough. The courts can be independent, make dumb decisions. That's true.
but no, I don't think the South African press. And listen, I'm talking to you at the moment. I see, and I'm saying all sort of horrible things about the ANC, and I've been saying all sort of horrible things about the ANC for a long time. And the press call me all the time. I'm the most quoted economist in South Africa.
True.
So, and I say these sort of things. So the press do actually, but of course, as an economist, my approach is slightly different. I've got numbers behind me, and I try to make sure that I give the actual correct information when I talk to the press. Yes, I get, but if you compare South Africa's press to other places in the world, if you compare it to Zimbabwe, if you compare it to many other countries in Africa, there's simply no comparison. So I'm not saying the press in South Africa is objective always, but I can assure you that they are very much independent. When it comes to the judiciary, the similar sort of thing. I also don't think that the judges are always really that objective, but they can pretty much do what they want. Not all of them, and I'm not suggesting there's any shenanigans going on, but I can refer you to something called the Zondo Commission, and I'm sure you know about the Zondo Commission. And Judge Raymond Zondo, did a pretty good job there, and all we need to do is actually implement these recommendations. So that's what I mean by that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's fair. No, that's fair. It's just been disappointing decisions from the court that there's. But look, our Supreme Court has had some nonsensical decisions that don't make sense and don't comport with the Constitution. So, the court isn't always objective. That's a fair point. Now, back on your key tenets for the ANC, those things you say make sense. But I always thought the most important overriding concern for the ANC was loyalty to the Luthuli House. That comes first and foremost, and that plays out in everything you said. The cater deployment, you only go to the Western Cape from the Luthuli House if you're loyal to the ANC. So you're not representing the constituents. And that's one of the fundamental problems with South Africa's democracy, is that you don't vote for people. Now, it's not a perfect system. We vote for people directly. If we don't like what they do, we can vote them out the next time. But you have no choice. The parties make a party list. They pick the people, and you vote for a party, and you get what you get. So that's a fundamental problem. But yeah, catered deployment is a major problem. I agree with that. But loyalty to the Thule House. But the decline of South Africa that you talk about is striking. And I go back to South Africa every 6 months or so, and I can see it up close and personal. When you're in it, you don't see it as much or as often. But when you come back periodically, you really see how shabby things have become. You look at the streets where they were clean, and now there's weeds growing up in them, and then the robots don't work, and and it's one thing after another, and that's just the minor stuff. But if you were talking about electricity, if you go back to early 1990s, South Africa with 34 million people, Eskom produced 42% of all electricity generated in the entire continent of Africa. A continent at that time is 750 million people. That's a shocking figure. And much of that electricity was exported throughout the Southern African power pool to Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, Eswatini, then Swaziland, and Lesotho, all across there. And they were a major player. But it's a complete disaster. And you talk about the parastatals, the airports company South Africa, Transnet, South African Airways. They talk about the dodo of South African Airways. It should be buried in a grave somewhere, but it's not. Denel, Arms Corps, the list goes on of all these. And now they're creating new ones. The ANC's answer is always create new parastatals when none of them work because they're patronage projects. They're places to put their caterers on boards to fleece money out of it. And that's what happened to SA, among other things. So I think all of these things are really devastating South Africa. And they're just emblematic of what's going on. We haven't even got to talk about how the infrastructure is collapsing. South Africans no longer drive on the right-hand side of the road or the left-hand side. They drive on what's left of the road. That's what they do. And you can't ship coal to ArcelorMittal or Coke because they can't get it there. So they bring it by trucks, and now they're going bankrupt. The list goes on and on. But under the National Party, things were terrible. Apartheid was morally reprehensible, and millions of people live in abject poverty. But the number of black Africans living in abject poverty under the National Party is dwarfed by today's ANC. 34 million blacks live in abject poverty. It was only 9 million at the height of the National Party. And they had services. They had free clinics and things like that. So it's really a mess. That's a lot. I don't know if you want to jump in there on any of those things real quick, but I'll give you a chance to jump in. We both can get on a roll, so I'm going to slow my roll down and let you jump in.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I look at numbers. I mentioned earlier that I compare South Africa in terms of all sort of things to emerging economies. I compare South Africa to the rich world and to averages and all sort of thing. And just about in each one of those measurements, South Africa deteriorated and quite significantly the last couple of years. I look at things like, for example, not only compared to many, even other African countries, but South Africa also, relative to itself, deteriorated quite significantly recently. There was the single most important number that economists perhaps look at are things like, for example, per capita GDP. And like I've mentioned earlier, South Africa on a per capita GDP basis today are poorer than 15 years ago. And I can give you some other numbers as well. South Africa's unemployment number today is in excess of 40%. There are 25% of South African kids. Remember big countries, very poor countries like China and India until recently, they had literally, in some cases, hundreds of millions of people living in abject poverty. Abject poverty is when you go to bed hungry. They got rid of abject poverty, the Chinese about 5 years or so ago, and the Indians about a year or two ago. They do not have abject poverty anymore where people go to bed literally without having had enough to eat for that day. In South Africa, abject poverty is going up. 25% of our kids are going to bed hungry. That's got a huge impact on their cognitive development, and that means that they simply cannot be very productive citizens once when they start working in a workforce. Talking about that, and there's something else that I'm extremely concerned about. South Africa spent more money on education on absolute and in relative terms than most other countries in the world. Most countries. Like I've said earlier, I analyze the fiscal accounts and I do it. This budget that we just had was the 40th budget that I've analyzed. I used to work at the South African Central Bank. I used the fiscal accounts and all that. And I also assisted with the setting up with budgets in the past and so on. So I've been analyzing budgets or the fiscal accounts for literally 40 years.
Dawie, let me jump in and interrupt you for just a second, okay? Yeah. Okay, because I don't want that point to get too far away from us. You're right. They do spend more money on education than most countries around the world. We spend the most on education of any country in the world, and our outcomes have been on a downward glide path for 40 years. So money isn't the issue. There are other issues in education. It's not being spent wisely. That's the problem.
That is exactly the point. Now, so if you look at the Minister of Finance's budget, the biggest expense item is actually education. We spend more on education than anybody, like I've said. But if you compare the outcome of our education in South Africa, it's not only bad, it is sometimes the worst in the world. It's still last in the world. Now, this is important because as an economist, I look at, of course, the world economy and the South African economy as well. But economic growth today, and I think the United States is an excellent example of this. Economic growth happens in the tertiary industry, happens in the service industry. That is, of course, agriculture is still important. Of course, mining is still important. But on a relative basis, it's far less important today all over the world than it used to be in the past. I mean, in South Africa, 100 years ago, about 80% of our total GDP consisted of primary stuff, like what happens in agriculture and mining. And today, that is about 10% of the economy. So the other part of the economy is becoming far more important. The service part, the tertiary part of the economy. But in order to participate in that modern size or the kind of part of the economy, you need to have certain skills. And we don't have that. We don't produce people with the necessary skills in order to participate in that part of the economy. They want to keep on creating jobs, the ANC says. They want to create jobs. But their idea of creating jobs is to give somebody a flag, to wave a flag next to a road. That's not a job. That is keeping people busy. What we need to do, we need to have the people that is properly qualified with the necessary skills to participate in the modern part of the economy, and then jobs will follow. You don't need to create jobs. You need to get the economy to grow, and once the economy grows, jobs will follow. And that's a major problem that I have, not only with the ANC, just by the way, but many other political parties all over the world. They all want to create jobs. Please stop creating jobs. Put measures in place to grow the economies, and jobs will look after themselves. So there are some of the major issues, but I think what I would do, in fact, if you look at South Africa's education system, especially if you look at how many universities we have, I think we've got something like 12 or 13 universities in South Africa. Some of them are really, really good universities. Some of them, they are still world-class universities in South Africa, but in the past they were even better. But what I would do if I was in a position of power, I will probably close down half the universities in South Africa, and I will spend that money where it really, really will make a big difference, and that is on primary education. Well, we do not have a solid base to really train our young people to become really skilled in the modern economy. Primary education in South Africa is absolutely horrible, and our kids are losing out, and they are not prepared to become productive citizens in this country anymore because of the horrible quality of our primary education. And the reason why it is so bad, my apologies, the reason why it is so bad is because most teachers in South Africa today belong to South African Teachers Union, SATU, and they are members of COSATU, the Trade Union Federation, and COSATU is part of the tripartite alliance consisting of the ANC, the COSATU, and the South African Communist Party. That's the problem that we have.
Well, we have a similar problem with teachers' unions in America. They're not focused on educational outcomes. They're focused on teachers. And, when we shut down schools foolishly at the start of COVID a few years ago, they were chomping at the bit to cut schools down. Disregarding the fact that you can't take 5- and 6-year-olds and just start a year later and get the same outcomes. You retard social development, kids not exposed to others, and you cause so many developmental problems, and we're now dealing with it. And we're going to have a generation of psychopaths, not all of them, but they're going to be more than the usual number, seriously, because kids didn't adjust well, they didn't learn. I mean, we're seeing this already. But as far as South Africa's outcomes in education, 100%, I mean, what you need is to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. Instead of trying to put 1 million black South Africans in subsistence farming, which is the ANC's goal, they've stated it. That's what they want to do. That's why they need land reform. Of course, they've wasted 30 years and they've bought 4 million hectares and they've distributed it poorly. And we won't get into that, but we can get into that. But you need to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. So you need people that are learning coding and learning robotics and artificial intelligence and people who are working in pharmaceuticals and things like that. But that's not where South Africa's going. And there's problems here. The first problem is expectations. Are you still with me? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I'm there with you.
Okay.
I just plugged in my computer.
Okay. I was worried we lost you there. So, but the first problem is how there's expectations. When you lower the standards to pass matric to 30%, 30%, 30%, and then 40% in your first language, and you're considered a graduate, that's a lie. You're misleading these people. They have expectations. They go out in the world. You can't get a job with 30%. Now, people are always telling me, well, Chris, they won't get a university. Well, yeah, some people with 50 and 60%, which is a failing grade, will still get a university because of quotas that discriminate. But that's another story. So expectations are too low. Then you have infrastructure in the country that's too low. And then you have the investment climate that's terrible. So foreign direct investment is not interested in South Africa for the most part. Ramaphosa promised $100 billion. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just make a comment about foreign direct investments in South Africa? I did mention earlier, I want to come back to the land issue. You mentioned the land issue, and that's something important to understand. But I just want to make a comment about foreign direct investment in South Africa. There are basically two kinds of investment, foreign investment in a country. The one is fixed investment, where a foreigner will come in and build a factory, for example, or they will buy 10% or more of a company or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff we want. But there's another kind of investment, and that is what economists call portfolio flows. Mm-hmm. And portfolio flows is where foreigners come in and they buy your capital market instruments, or they buy your listed stocks. So in South Africa, and South African financial markets are very, very liquid. I mentioned that earlier, and the yields are so attractive. I mean, on 30-year bonds in South Africa, you can get more than 11%. Yeah, in a liquid market.
That's insane.
It's crazy. I mean, this, and that is what the Americans do. You know, the last data that I've seen, I think it's for the first quarter, the first quarter's data this year. The Americans of foreign investments in the portfolio flows in South Africa. The Americans invested about 50%. They're the biggest investors. Unfortunately, that kinds of investments can leave the country very quickly again. So look at it as a foreigner. A foreigner look at South Africa, and what they see is a very, very cheap currency. The currency is hugely undervalued. So you buy a cheap currency, your entrance is very cheap. Secondly, you buy in a very liquid market, in a very well regulated market. And thirdly, you buy at a ridiculously high yield. I mean, where on earth can you get more than 11% with a cheap entrance and a liquid market? More than 11%. That is and with inflation currently just above 3% in South Africa. This is a sitter. This is such an attractive. But, and this is something that I'm very concerned about. What I am concerned about is that if the Americans really want to hurt us, and they apply some or implement some sort of financial sanction against portfolio flows or other kinds of flows, in the financial sanctions against South Africa, that is something that's really going to hurt us. But let me come back, and that happened, by the way, in the 1980s. And that's the reason why we have a new political dispensation in South Africa, because of financial sanctions. But let me come back to the land issue. The land issue in South Africa, now, I'm not going to I can take a position, but I'm not going to take a position. The reality is that there's all sort of disagreements in terms of what's going on with lands in South Africa. Who stole land from whom? Who owes who? Who bought what from who? What wars were where, or whatever. Everybody is fighting about. Nobody is going to agree about land in South Africa, and I'm not going to stick my head into that
bear trap. That bear trap.
But because we are not going to agree about land. So that's the first point that I want to make. The second point, and I think this is crucially important, and this is not only agriculture in South Africa, it is worldwide. There are 4 industries that I particularly like, but agriculture is one of them. Now, in South Africa, agriculture, the business model for agriculture was, you've got a guy, he's the farm manager, he owns the farm, he will borrow money from the bank, he will pay for his fertilizer, he will harvest, he will repay the bank, and will put that is the business, that used to be the business model of agriculture. Pretty much straightforward, individually run kind of thing. That is what, and I guess in the US, pretty much the same, until relatively recently. What is happening in South Africa, agriculture is not a one-man show anymore. It's becoming a corporate business. And today, you find big corporates that are involved in agriculture. And today in South Africa, and I guess very much in the United States, if you want to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, if you want to be a financial guru or whatever, you can also do that in agriculture. because agriculture is not a primary industry anymore. Like I mentioned earlier, agriculture today has become an advanced corporate, service-driven and technologically driven business. And that's the point that many people are missing out in South Africa. It's not the land that matters, it's what you do with the land. That is what matters. People don't care about the land. They care about what you can do in order to become financially well off in a free economy. And that is what matters. And I'm afraid politicians in South Africa are blowing this thing about land up. They are using it as a tool to get people to threaten one another and to use it for politics. That's what it is. While in the actual fact, land is not the issue. What matters is what you do with that. And if you want to become involved in agriculture, like I've said, you need certain skills and technology, and we don't have that.
Folks, you're listening to the Indaba conversation today with Dawie Roodt, economist from South Africa, and myself here, Chris, in Pennsylvania. Dawie, yeah, you talk about financial flows there, but that's a dual-edged sword. South Africa, from a returns perspective, is very attractive, but it depends where you park that money. So we just saw trillion rand or something like that shaved off the market value over the events past couple of days and in stocks.
Whoa.
But if you talk about bonds, if I buy bonds today and they're 20-year bonds, 20 years ago, I lived in Botswana, and it was 5 or 4.5 or 5 rand to the dollar. Now it's 19. And so I may wind up with a negative return there based on the actual what I put in and what I get back. So, I mean, if you get a bond, it's long term, unless you sell it either at a profit or loss along the way. You know, and the point of that is that money can move quickly. You can take that money out overnight unless they put controls in to stop it, and then you make the market less attractive and people get out as soon as they can. So that's a very dangerous situation, as you alluded to in the 1980s. Americans pulled their money out. It just became too risky, and we're reaching that stage now.
Yeah, let me just give you a couple of things about the South African markets. And I can just tell you, the past 2-3 days, I personally lost quite a lot on the South African stock exchange.
Oh, you think you lost a lot? I'm in America where the stock's $6.4 trillion of value, and I'm invested in the stock market. But you know what? If I've got any cash, I'm waiting for the bottom of the barrel, the dip. It's a buying opportunity. I got solid companies. I don't buy fly-by-nights.
Fortunately, I've got some cash waiting for the US market and waiting for the American market. The American market was too expensive. Let's be honest about it. The US market was just too expensive. Okay, let's have a look at South Africa. The bond market in South Africa. So what you're referring to is actually the volatility on exchange rate. So if you buy South African currency, the big risk that you're running is that once you convert or once you move your investment out of South Africa, the rand has lost a lot of value. And then you lose actually out because it's a currency risk that you're taking. You can, of course, hedge that. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive, but you can hedge that. But I can tell you, and I've done all sort of calculations on the exchange rate of the rand, our currency, and the rand is always an undervalued currency. But at the moment where it's trading at about more than 19 rand to the US dollar, it is more undervalued than usual. So yes, there is a risk, but the risk is for the mere fact that it is already more undervalued than usual. That sort of, I think, to an extent, mitigates some of the risk. I did mention about the liquidity of the market, how well the South African markets are run. But what I haven't mentioned yet is that the South African, the JSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, where the biggest bourse in South Africa, we are losing a lot of companies on the JSE, but many companies are delisting, including my company. We delisted recently, but it's not only a South African phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon to a large extent. But the South African, if you look at South African JSE, our biggest bourse in South Africa, they're earning something like 70% of their earnings are abroad. Big companies that are listed in South Africa originated from South Africa, and they're earning a lot of their earnings is actually abroad. So actually, we've got South African companies that are actually international companies, and they are listed in South Africa. So although you're running a currency risk, that is true. Those companies are pretty much hedges against the possibility of a currency risk. So South Africa. But that's unfortunate in a way, because of course I want portfolios coming into South Africa, and there are very, very good quality assets in South Africa. But we also want actual factories being built in South Africa, people coming with real foreign direct investment in South Africa, and they're not going to come because it's too dangerous. It is too dangerous to build a factory in South Africa. You're not going to have electricity. You will have politicians that are corrupt. You will be overtaxed, and I can tell you all sort of things about taxes in South Africa. You've got a militarized labor force in South Africa. It's just too dangerous. But you can come in quickly and take a bite out of the apple, and it is a very, very attractive apple. So on the equity markets and on the various other financial markets, like, for example, the capital market and even the money market. But actually building factories in South Africa is very, very, and including for South Africans. South Africans do not like to invest in South Africa. I'm an asset manager. I look after people's money. And when somebody walks into my office, they tell me two things. They tell me, firstly, I do not want to pay tax. Secondly, I want to take my money out. Those are the two things that South Africans tell me when they walk into my office.
All right, so I'm a foreign direct investor. I want to invest in South Africa, and I build drones for agriculture and for military. All right, so I want to build in South Africa. So here are the obstacles for me coming in. Look, it's better than many places in Africa. And, you know, look, I could go to Liberia and become a multimillionaire in short order because I know how to negotiate the port to get through the 34 agencies that tax people there and not pay taxes. I know who to grease the palms, but I'm not crooked, so I'm not going to go to Liberia. So I'm saying, you know, there's ways to make money when there's high risk. But South Africa, so I'm going to come in. I want to build a factory in the Western Cape. Okay, first off, I've got to deal with the fact, well, the Western Cape's a bad example. Let me build it in Mpumalanga where things are broken better, okay? Mpumalanga. So I build my factory in Mpumalanga. I've got to deal with militant work unions. I got to deal with the taxi industry for people trying to get in combis to and from work where they assassinate people. That's more PE, but still it's all over. I've got to deal with collapsing infrastructure, the potholes, the vehicles that I have to get my material around. I have to repair them more than normal because of the road wear and what's going on there. Plus, we've got hijackings taking place at the Mooi River Plaza if you go down to Durban to get to the port. And on top of that, I've got to provide my own electricity, so I got to build solar there to pay for that. Then I've got to hire my own security force because the police are underfunded or not reliable. And so I've got to have 24-hour surveillance, and I've got to hire G4S or somebody like that. Then I've got to have all kinds of insurance and hazard insurance. And on top of that, I got corrupt officials coming around and demanding 30% of my equity because of BEE. I mean, in so many ways, look, I understand why Microsoft and Google invest because they're not fixed assets. They're not building factories. They're renting buildings that someone else is taking a risk building for them in the Western Cape. They come in, they lease the building, they put a bunch of smart people in there, they hook up to a network, and when things go south, they get on a plane, they fly out, and they've already transferred their assets out. So that's very liquid too, even though that's an established company. So as a foreign direct investor, look, for those who don't understand South Africa, it may look appealing. For those who understand it, you really have to think hard about this. I mean, honestly, you know, Africa suffers from three things. The perception is what matters. You know, this is an economist, Dawie. Perception for investors matters. So one of the things I've been trying to help Americans overcome is what I call C cubed. And that is coups, corruption, or chaos, corruption, and coup d'etat. Sorry, I got a cough here too. Coups, corruption, chaos, corruption, and coup d'etat. These are the three things that Americans and Europeans see Africa as. 54 different countries with coups, chaos everywhere, and corruption. I don't want to get in that marketplace. And then they miss the fact that ECOWAS exists, that SADC exists, and now the African Free Trade Agreement exists, even though the modalities aren't really sorted out yet. But these are mechanisms that let you get in one country and into a larger market. So if you get into Botswana or South Africa, you're in SADC, and you get advantage from that. But helping people overcome that is one of the reasons I started consultancy. Okay. But go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, well, you mentioned a long list of things, but I can add a couple of things to that as well. And one major problem that we've got something called the construction mafia, which means that if you want to build a factory or build anything, that then there's somebody that demanding some subcontracting and all sort of stuff. Well, you know, I'm a South African. I'm an African. I've been looking at Africa. There's the African continent and African economies and so on. And as an economist, I see three major obstacles in Africa. The first major obstacle in Africa, the first major obstacle is infrastructural problems. We do not have roads, we do not have bridges, we do not have railroads. We've got an infrastructural issue in Africa. And South Africa, we used to have all of those. We're losing that because of mismanagement and all of that. But infrastructure is a major thing. There's an infrastructural deficit in Africa. The second major issue that we have and we had that in South Africa as well, we're losing out on that. You need human capital You need people that can do stuff, people with the necessary skills, and people that can build those bridges and roads and more things like that. So human capital is a major obstacle in Africa. We need to fix that. The third thing, and that's perhaps the biggest challenge in Africa, we've got a massive, what I call institutional deficit in Africa. Now, what I mean with an institutional deficit are basically the rules of the game. A good example is if I want to buy a house in Lusaka, can I actually buy it? And once I've paid over the money, do I actually know that this house will become my house? Or if I get robbed in Maputo, can I go to a policeman and a policeman will actually take my case and solve the problem for me? Or if there's an election, will the election actually be free and fair, for example, in the rules of the game? And I would argue that is Africa's biggest deficit. We do not have strong institutions. And the reason why we don't have strong institutions is because of weak political leadership. Not only in South Africa, all over the place. Weak political leadership. With strong political leadership, you will have strong institutions like the protection of private property rights, which is crucially important. Like, for example, the protection and the encouragement of free trade, which is crucially important. Like, for example, the independence of your central bank guaranteeing, for example, sound money, which is crucially important. Now, see what happened in Zimbabwe. They do not have any of those. They do not have the protection of property rights, and we are undermining it in South Africa. We're in a process of undermining it even further. They don't have proper free trade, and we are doing exactly the same in South Africa. They don't even have a currency in Zimbabwe because they've destroyed their currency as well, because people do not trust the Zimbabweans anymore for very good reasons. Those are the three major things that we need. Infrastructure, people with skills, and good institutions. And in South Africa, we're going out of our way to undermine that.
Oh, indeed. In fact, it's almost intentional. It's criminally negligent what's happening in South Africa. But as far as institutional deficit, 100%, we're drinking the same Kool-Aid, Dawie. I mean, I've been talking about this for decades. You know, I see it up close and personal. The institutions. So, for instance, if I'm a foreign investor, I want to invest in a market, I got to have confidence that if I'm cheated by a supplier, I have a means of restitution. I can go to a court and sue them in a reasonable, timely fashion so that I can get that adjudicated. But you don't have that in most of Africa. You can't go to a court and sort out your business. So you take risk, and you take a risk you're going to be cheated or someone's going to steal from you. That's a problem. One of the things about America people talk about America because we're isolated by, it's the 21st century, but go back to the 17th, 18th, 19th. One of the reasons why America rose to industrial power, besides the fact that Europe destroyed itself in 2 wars, is that we were isolated. We were across the oceans, which defended us. We weren't under assault by attack for the most part. We grew across a continent which is blessed with mineral resources and natural resources and navigable rivers that go in the right direction. And we have deep harbors, all that. We are blessed. But we also are blessed with human capital that came here to escape Europe, religious persecution, ethnic persecution, racism, all these things. But one of the things that people often overlook is something that Alexis de Tocqueville identified in the 1820s when he was here. He came to America and he went everywhere. He was all over the America at the time, and he traveled to find out what's the secret success of America. And I remember France had its revolution at this point, and they were going through another phase headed towards empire again. And he came here, and in his view, and he was 100% correct, America was strong because of institutions and because of its education. Even though there weren't formal schools, even farmers in remote bush country of Western Pennsylvania or West Virginia, he would meet with them. They would talk about Thucydides and Robespierre and the Enlightenment, and they would know these things. They were just farmers, but they were educated. They were talented. And the same thing when people worked in industry, in the cotton mills and in the textile factories. America had an educated workforce. And the second thing he talked about was our institutions. Now, I just talked about a government institution for courts, but that's not the only thing. When you're seeking right of redress, you need the courts. But America's secret sauce was the Better Business Bureau, the American Medical Association, the Scouts when they came along, for the Boy Scouts. These are civil society groups that self-regulate. They come up with standards, the Standard American Equivalent, SAE, for tools. We also have the Underwriter Laboratories who certify electrical devices. Without that certification, people don't buy your goods because they trust that mark. So all of these private institutions do not exist for the most part in Africa. Now, sadly, in some cultures in Africa, they weren't the same, but mechanisms to address these sort of things in society were there, and they were undermined by the colonial impact, and it wiped those things out in places like Nigeria and in Tanzania, where the Germans and the Brits took over. They kind of wiped these things out to gain control. But That's what's missing. And I think that's what you're talking about as well.
But let me add to that, and they say you can look at it slightly differently as well, and that is that if you look at Africa, the reason why we have various countries in Africa is to serve the politicians. They are the important people. Well, and that's a big difference in the United States. The way I understand it, I've been to the US, and I was just, if there's any other country but South Africa that I would like to go and stay in, it's the United States. And the reason why is because the Americans are like the Afrikaners, pretty much. The value system is pretty much the same. And I'm an Afrikaner. But in the United States, the state and the politicians are there to serve the people. Well, that's the big difference.
They're supposed
and
to
not
be.
the other way around.
They're supposed to
and
be.
in Africa, remember what the ANC is doing in South Africa. Yeah. And I can give you the legislation that they're busy with. Let me just interrupt myself for a moment. The way I see countries do not exist. Countries are only an idea. A country is an idea, and a lot of people decide we are going to create something, and we're going to call it a country. And we're going to create all sort of things, and the things that we're going to create will include things like a constitution, and a president, and an army, and a police force, and a geographic area, or whatever we want to, and we're going to call it a country. That is what a country is. But it doesn't really exist. It exists in the minds of people. And we change countries all the time. I mean, sometimes you've got a country and we cut it in half, or we put countries together and you've got a new country, or whatever the case may be. So it is an idea. And that's what we have wrong in Africa quite often. People think the country is the thing. It's not the country that is the thing. It's the people that's the thing. And the country is there for one reason and one reason only. And that is to serve the people. And unfortunately, you've got that. But we do not have that yet. And the ANC government is destroying it even more in South Africa.
Well, 100%. You know, and here's the problem. When African countries gained their independence, they had a golden opportunity to change the colonial borders. They could have done it. But out of self-interest, the politicians didn't want that. Those who took over the countries, they didn't want that.
What I would have done, in fact, I am very much in favor of this African free trade agreement. I would have created the United States of Africa. That's what I would have done. And allow people to do whatever they want to, and of course within certain limits. But Africa is a massive, huge continent with amazing resources and young people. Very few continents got this. And with the right management and a good political leadership, South Africa can become the United States of the world, of Africa.
Absolutely. But when you can get something shipped from mainland China to Durban in just 6 or 7 days at 1/8 of the cost of getting the same thing shipped from Nairobi, from the port of Mombasa to Durban, you know, at 8 times the cost, and it takes 4 or 6 months to get it, you got a problem.
Can I just tell you, you won't be able to ship much to Durban anymore because the harbor doesn't work anymore.
Okay, well, while we're on that, South Africa has the worst rated ports on the planet. All these people talking about how, you know, and Joel Pollack jumping in saying, well, Simonstown's important. Simonstown don't mean jack squat. And the only threat to the sea lanes would be if the Chinese gain access to a military base or port in South Africa. They got one in Djibouti, but we're right next to them at the airfield in Djibouti, so we keep an eye on them. But if they gain it and they're a nefarious actor, say they get Simonstown and they're there, they operate a base, that's the only threat. But short of that, the sea lanes mean nothing. You know, they're open. The U.S. Navy patrols the global sea lanes. We're the global policemen like the Brits used to do, ensuring free trade and stopping piracy in much of the global sea lanes, and we can do that. Now, if we were granted access to Simonstown, it'd be a lot cheaper and more easier for us, and a lot of our sailors would have a good time meeting some boermeissie in wine country, you know, but maybe having families. But the bottom line is it doesn't mean anything. All these South Africans think that South Africa is so important. Oh, we have the sea lanes. Get your head out of the 1970s. The world has changed. This isn't the world of the 1970s. You know, all this stuff it's very different than it was back then. As long as nobody is obstructing traffic around the sea lanes, it doesn't matter. Because nobody's stopping in your ports. They suck. They suck. They're the worst rated in the world. Not by me, Dawie, but by the folks that do this.
I know. And if you listen to the ANC leadership, our political leaders in South Africa, they keep on telling us, when you talk to the Americans, we are speaking to the Americans as equals. We are not equals to the Americans. The American economy is 20% of the world. We are 0.4% of the world's economy. It used to be much more. We used to be about 1% or just over 1% of the world's economy. But after the last 30 years, we really fell back in that position, from that position.
No, South Africa's economy is on life support. So let's talk about some of the impacts. Let me run through some of them, and I'll let you comment. If you need to interrupt me, feel free to do it. Okay, first off, you talked about USA being South Africa's number 2 trading partner. Statement of fact. In about 2013, 2014, China surpassed us. Historically, we were always the largest trading partner with South Africa, but they surpassed us. But there's a key difference in that trade. South Africa ships coal and other resources, mineral resources to China, and you get this much of the value chain because you're sending commodities. What you send to America, by and large, are finished projects that go up the beneficiation level, the value-added chain. So when you ship from Pretoria a BMW, or you ship a Mercedes-Benz from South Africa to the United States, that is produced in South Africa. The parts are produced in South Africa, and all that ecosphere of all that employment around that, all the jobs, the service industry, all the things that feed that, that's all in South Africa. You're not just simply sending us steel or sending us iron. So all that wealth goes, or money goes back to South Africa, and the finished product goes to America. And $3 billion of your trade, which you have $14 billion exports to U.S. and about $5 billion imports right now. So I go with $20 billion a year because it fluctuates, goes up and down, but $20 billion is a good figure. $3 billion of that is duty-free. There's no duty on it whatsoever under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, but there's no reciprocity. When I ship things to South Africa, I have to pay duty. And if I get honest people, I pay the flat duty. But if I get criminals that are working for customs and immigration, then I get screwed. I shipped as a personal person 4 hats and some Starbucks pumpkin spice latte sachets to Ronaldo Cruz in 2020. It cost me $312 through DHL to get it there, 2 days. It got there. And then it sat at the airport for 4 months or 3 months because they demanded $500 of taxes on $75 worth of goods.
Okay, let me interrupt you. No, you're right, Anna. Let me interrupt you. Don't take. I can't remember all the exact numbers. But broadly speaking, what we mostly export basic stuff to China, not manufactured stuff, and we mostly import manufactured stuff from China. So the value add happens in China, and that's just let me interrupt myself for a moment. That is a fundamental problem that we have in South Africa. If you're stimulating demand in South Africa, and that's what the ANC government keeps wanting to do all the time, you are actually stimulating the Chinese economy because we're going to import more from China. That's what happens. Not only China, other places as well, but China is the big beneficiary from that. So we export basic stuff and we import manufactured stuff from China. If you look at the United States, we export a lot of basic stuff to the United States as well. Not as much as to the Chinese, because that is basically only basic stuff like minerals and stuff that we export to China. But I think approximately 50% of what we export to the United States is actually things like platinum and rhodium and palladium and stuff like that. But what you are right with is that there's a significant chunk of our exports that actually is value added. Like, for example, motor cars. The motor car industry in South Africa, we export a lot of motor cars to the United States. And also an industry that I like quite a lot is the agricultural industry. And we export a lot of stuff like wines and all of fruits and stuff to the United States as well. So yes, there is a major difference as far as that is concerned. I had a look at some of the tariffs. The highest tariff is actually on the Americans is actually on chicken, certain cuts of chicken meat. I think that is something like 60% or so. But our total tariffs against the US isn't certainly 60%. I do not know how that was calculated.
Oh, I can tell. I know how it was calculated. It's not.
I know. I think I've got an idea. You look at the trade deficit, and then you can work out some sort of ratio there, and you call that a tariff. That is not 100% correct to do it that way around. There are other arguments. You can argue, for example, there are non-financial limitations to imports and exports. You can argue that the currency is overvalued or undervalued or whatever. You can that sort of arguments you can argue, but to look at only at the trade deficit and use that,
but that wasn't
as a so-called proxy for an import duty, that is not correct.
No, I agree with you, it's not correct, but that's not how they did it. That was a consideration. But the quotas and artificial barriers, for instance. There was a time when Japan forced any motorcycle imported to Japan to be completely disassembled and reassembled. Who makes a rule like that? Well, that adds labor to every motorcycle. So Harley Davidsons, which were very popular in Japan, became prohibitively expensive because they added labor of disassembling a finished product. Well, so South Africa puts limits on our poultry. So we can only ship so much poultry there because your poultry industry is under pressure. And they put punitive sanctions or tariffs on us a few years ago at 75%. On our poultry, and we took no retaliatory steps against South Africa, and we just asked them to back off that. They eventually did.
Can I let me interrupt you? You know, it's not only you, it's not only the Americans that got a short end of the stick here.
Oh, I know.
We the South African consumers as well. Motor cars in South Africa are extremely expensive. And the reason why motor cars are so expensive because there basically is a huge subsidy to the South African motor industry. So it's not only you, it's us as well. We are paying, in some instances, motor cars in South Africa cost double the price of many other countries in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of the huge import duties that and basically it's a hidden subsidy to the local motor car industry. And we've had that for many years in South Africa. So despite this massive subsidy to the motor car industry, they still cannot, without that specific subsidy, survive anymore. So, I mean, that's a very good example where you protect your own local industry with the assumption, if you can protect your local industry, the day will come when they will be able to wash their own faces, to stand on their own financial feet. But it still hasn't come in South Africa because they are protected all the time. And so this is an example of something that we tried and it didn't work. And we, the South Africans, are paying. Actually, we pay much more subsidy to the local motor car industry than what you guys got to pay.
No, absolutely. You know, another challenge you have is economy of scale. You know, you've got market size. South Africa's market's decent, but like you go next door to Botswana, the retail market is tiny. So I also explain to people, you know, because they come to America and they can find a 65-inch television for like 1/4 of the price of what they pay in Botswana. And they're like, why is it so cheap here? Because the taxes, the VAT isn't that high. Botswana, I think they're up to 14% now. It used to be 10%. Maybe it's a little bit higher. But the real reason why it's higher is because, you know, if you have, what's the Universal, whatever. It used to be I can't remember the store that sold stuff. Anyway, electronics in South Africa. Incredible Universe. I think that's what it was. Anyway, so if you got Incredible Universe in Gaborone, they might be selling 4 TVs a week. They've got to make enough money to pay the electricity, to pay their staff, to pay their insurance, to make a profit. So their margins have to be much higher on each individual thing they sell. Plus, they got to deal with theft and damage. Whereas in America, we've got a consumer market of over 200 million people buying crap all the time. And so on volume, you can reduce the margin and still become vastly wealthy in the right field. So that's a disadvantage you have with market size. But Africa in the aggregate has a huge market, and that market is growing, as you and I talked about privately before the conversation started on air, is that my estimation is there'll be 900 million consumers in Africa by the year 2050. And people that don't see that are missing the boat. The Turks see this. The Emirates see this. China sees this. I think Brazil sees it, but they're not very well positioned to take advantage of. The Europeans are too busy, wrapped up in their own nonsense to pay attention to it and withdrawing from much of Africa. But the Americans don't see it, and they really need to open their eyes up. That's one reason why I started consultancy. You know, there's a lot of drawbacks. So I didn't even get to this earlier. We're talking about the challenge in South Africa. Like, for instance, you know, you have a world-class work ethic and you have a suboptimal work ethic in South Africa. You've got useless people who are uneducated or have terrible work ethic, no commit to work, and you've got fantastic people across the education spectrum who do that. So you're going to have disparate work. You know, you're going to have good people, you're going to have bad people. Plus, you've also got issues, you know, even with antiretrovirals, you used to have a lot of people dying from HIV and tuberculosis all the time. People disappear for an entire week for funerals. That's not something that happens in the developed world. A lot of challenges, but I think that, well, anyway, I got off track where I was going with that. If you want to jump in there.
Well, okay. Well, let me perhaps, you know, we've been talking about all the bad things happening in South Africa.
Let's talk about the good things.
Yeah, but there are some good things happening in South Africa. Like I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, is that I believe South Africa is in a transition phase. We're getting rid of the ANC. I believe South Africans will, and we are slowly becoming mature democracy in South Africa. We still have a lot of infrastructure left. Like I've mentioned, our financial markets are doing really, really, really well. And, you know, there's some stuff that are really going badly, but it doesn't always matter because we can make a plan. You know, there's a saying in Afrikaans, 'n boer maak 'n plan. And we are making a plan, and there are many things working is still going fine in South Africa. But our major problem that we have today has to do with the quality of our political leadership. You mentioned earlier, Action, I think you mentioned Action South Africa is one of the political parties in South Africa that walked over to the ANC with this. There was a big, major political crisis in South Africa the past week, with a budget that couldn't get approved and so on. And so there's all sort of political infighting in South Africa. And I've got a suspicion that we're going to have a general election, maybe very soon, within 2 or 3 months in South Africa. And I'm pretty sure the ANC is going to lose big time again. And some of these other silly political parties, like these fascist parties on the far left, they're going to lose as well. And I think some of the slightly more centrist parties are probably going to be the biggest winners. So South Africa is slowly making progress. But, you know, what really really what is so, it breaks my heart to see where we were, what we could have achieved, and where we actually ended up after 30 years. It could have been so much different. South Africa really had everything going for it, but we missed it. We spoiled this opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is spoiled. It's a shame. So we can talk good stuff. I do want to talk good stuff in South Africa, but let me get back to some of the issues because I kind of label this as the challenges with the situation with the United States right now. So there are no sanctions. However, we see this legislation that member of Congress is putting up, whether it passes or not, it's a whole other issue. But Donald Trump has made this offer for Afrikaners. He didn't define what Afrikaners were. This other law being introduced now in Congress talks about white Afrikaners, but whoever it is. But there's a potential here for those, if they were able to take up this refugee offer, could have a devastating impact on South Africa. You talk about human capital. I can go to Canary Wharf and find all kinds of Zimbabweans and South Africans making a fortune and keeping the financial world flowing with trillions of dollars of money moving in and out of Canary Wharf every day. And I can also go to Toronto and New York and Dublin and find tons of South Africans, black, white, and brown, who are abroad with their human capital helping other countries when they should be in South Africa building its economy. So I think that the concern I have is this refugee offer could bleed South Africa dry of some human capital that it desperately needs. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's happening already. In fact, even without this offer from Donald Trump, and I'm afraid to say, the people that are going to take up this offer are probably not the very successful people. There are very successful business people in South Africa, and I can also tell you. Let me just go back a little bit. I'm an Afrikaner. My home language is Afrikaans, and I worked at the South African Central Bank, the South African Reserve Bank. And one of the worst things that could have happened to the Afrikaner in the past during apartheid was that the Afrikaners were not business people. The businesses in South Africa belonged to the English-speaking people. During apartheid, the National Party, that was Afrikaner nationalism. They employed Afrikaners in the civil service. They educated Afrikaners a lot, but the Afrikaners did not compete in the business market because they were looked after by the state to a large extent. Then the new South Africa happened in 1994, and the ANC started looking after blacks mostly and after their black supporters, and the Afrikaners were kicked out of the civil service. The result of that was that the civil service collapsed, basically, and the result of that was that the Afrikaners had to learn to swim. You had no choice. You had no option. Me, myself, I lost my job twice because I was not black. And I was forced to start my own business. And my business today is a very successful business because I did not have a choice. And that's what's happened. The Afrikaners became hugely successful business people, despite an environment that is very hostile to white people, but specifically to Afrikaners. And I can tell you, I can immigrate to the United States today if I want to. I'm not going to take up that specific offer. Thank you really very, very much, because I'm an African. I'm an Afrikaner. And if I go to the United States, I won't be an Afrikaner anymore, despite, I think, our cultures being very, very close to one another. So the people that are going to take up this offer are probably those that are not very successful business people, because the successful business people, they've taken their money out already. They are my clients. I know what they're doing with their clients. South Africa is the most amazing place to stay. We've got the most amazing steaks that you can think of. We've got the most amazing weather that you can think of. And if you have money, you can also look after your own security. Now, of course, it's a dangerous place and it's not always guaranteed. And there are many other obstacles, and also we are actively being discriminated against as white people. But it is a very nice place to be if you are successful, and many successful ones. So yes, thank you very much, President Trump, for the offer, but I'm probably not going to take this one up. But I would like to go back and do the Boston Marathon. I've done the New York Marathon. I would like to do the Boston Marathon as well, if I can get an entry. If you can help me with that one, please.
Well, I'm more interested in the comrades myself, but I want to run uphill because I don't want to tear my tendons going downhill to Durban. So, Dawie, I was in Durban a couple years ago in August of 2022, and I didn't realize that the comrades was running. When I was in Durban, I was staying in Amanzimtoti, and I stayed at the Anyway, just below the Central Business District there along the beach. And then before I left, I went into town because it was the comrades and parked the car right on the route, and then walked over and live broadcast from Durban the end of the comrades. I was like 2 blocks from where they finished, where the McDonald's is there on the route. And I filmed it for a little bit. There's a street there named after a British officer from the Anglo-Zulu War named Lieutenant Wyatt. And so I always go to Wyatt Street. It's like the shortest street in South Africa. It's 100 meters long. So it's just before the McDonald's. Anyway, unfortunately, it was fantastic watching the comrades. I've known about it for years. I watched The Long Run with Armin Muller-Stahl, a fantastic movie from South Africa with a German actor. But anyway, it's pretty good. And so I always wanted to see the comrades, and I saw it. But unfortunately, I saw the bad part, too. We saw someone drop dead right there. Just was really sad. I mean, because it happens. But those ultra marathons can be brutal. I don't know if you want to do those.
People that don't know, it's the oldest ultra marathon in the world. There are about 25,000 people running it. It is 90 kilometers, give or take 1 or 2 kilometers. 90 kilometers. You've got 12 hours to finish that. And I've done the up and down. It's an uphill and a downhill, either from Johannesburg to from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, or from Pietermaritzburg down to Durban. I've done both. If you do both, in 2 subsequent years, you get a 3rd medal. So I've got 3 medals. And my 2nd year that I've done it, and that was a downhill, and that is very much more tough, much more difficult to do than an uphill. And the 2nd one, I finished with 5 minutes to spare. 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think people forget that there's a cutoff. If you don't finish, you don't finish.
12 hours.
Yeah, you have to run it all day. Years ago, when I first heard of the comrades, many decades ago, I'm like, this is cool. How cool would it be to run from Pietermaritzburg down to the ocean? As you come down, you'd see it. You'd see the bluff down there and Amanzimtoti and the Central. It'd be so cool. And then somebody who was South African said, Chris, think about what you're saying. You don't want to do that. And I thought about it and said, why? Because you're running downhill all the time. It's brutal on your tendons and your joints. 100%. And so ever since then, I'm like, nope, I'm running uphill to Pietermaritzburg.
But if anybody listening about doing a sort of extreme sports, there are many wonderful extreme sports in South Africa, and also in Southern Africa, and in Africa, in fact. About a year and a half ago, I climbed Kilimanjaro, which was an emotional experience, I can tell you that. And what I'm planning to do in August this year is to go and climb Kilimanjaro again, but this time I'm going to ride down on a mountain bike. From the top, 6,000 meters above sea level, I'm going to ride down on a mountain bike, and I'm going to ride all the way to the sea in Kenya. So that is my next big adventure that I'm planning.
Well, I had a big plan, a similar plan in 2010. 2010, I was going to climb Kilimanjaro. Unfortunately, I had emergency gallbladder surgery after flying from Joburg to Atlanta, and then I flew to D.C. needing surgery. I didn't know it was a gallbladder. I thought it was food poisoning, and then finally went into Annapolis and had surgery and had my gallbladder removed. And so I was recuperating when I came back a week later, and then a few weeks later I had to go to Arusha for a conference, and that was the trip. I was taking a holiday, and I was going to climb Kilimanjaro. Well, I was recovering from the surgery, and I can't go up there with the altitude and all that. So I did climb Kilimanjaro. I went to the foothills of Kilimanjaro, and I walked a couple kilometers up a gentle slope to get up a ways, and then I turned and came back. So not to the top, but I have gone to Kilimanjaro. But that was definitely on the bucket list, and it kind of got sidelined by that gallbladder. So the funny thing is I saw my gallbladder on an ultrasound for the first time in my life, and it looked like the Zhuaneng diamond mine, big rough diamond stones that need to be polished inside there. But that wasn't the problem. I had one that got traveled down when I was sitting at the News Cafe at OR Tambo and eating, and it got stuck in the bile duct. And anyway, that's too much information. But yeah, so much for climbing Kilimanjaro. Maybe one day, but you got to do that stuff when you're young, and I was still relatively young when I did it. You get older, you don't want to do that. So let's talk a couple good things. South Africa, the macadamia nut industry. I've interviewed those folks a couple years ago. It's now the largest in the world, largest exporter. That's a big success story for South Africa.
The what? The macadamia.
Macadamia nut industry. Yeah.
Yeah. I know some of those farmers. They are very, very successful and very wealthy.
Yeah.
Very successful.
And it's also a farming field that's developed recently, so it's a more diverse, not that I'm looking at diversity, but it's one of the aspects of farming where you find women and blacks and colors and Indians involved in it, not just old white guys.
Can I just say something about macadamia? And that is, they actually add a lot of value to that.
Oh yeah.
Even the exports to China. They put sugar around it and they roast it and they do all sort of funny things to it and they create new kind of products with macadamia and they export it even to China. So that's a very good example of something that we actually add a lot of value to.
At the early stages of COVID, some really stupid decisions were taken, one of which was the ban on transport of alcohol, which almost submarined your entire export market for wine from Western Cape, which has a big export market, particularly the United States. Fortunately, people intervened and got the government to change that, and the damage was minimal to that wine industry, and you still have a very successful wine industry exporting wine. I don't know what's going to happen with AGOA, but I don't think it's going to have a major impact on me because if there's going to be tariffs, even if there's a 30% tariff on a bottle of wine, it goes from $9 to $11. I'll pay $11 for South African wine. I'm not buying your BMWs, but I'll buy your wine.
And I can tell you, South African wines are of the best wines in the world, without a doubt. But there's something that I'm very concerned about when you talk about alcohol sales in South Africa is that also during COVID, alcohol and cigarettes was banned. And that basically, if you ban something, you force it underground. And today in South Africa, more than 50% of cigarettes are sold actually in the underground market. And again, politicians, they levy all this huge the levies on taxes on cigarettes, and they're actually forcing more of that underground. And they've recently started doing the same with alcohol products. And if you keep on levying these kind of taxes on alcohol, you're going to force it underground as well. And once you create this underground market, this black market, then you're never going to get rid of it because it's so well established, especially for cigarettes in South Africa. And apparently there are many politicians involved in this. This is very, very profitable. If you put too much tax on cigarettes, then it becomes part of the illegal market. And that's where we are. And unfortunately, alcohol is probably going to follow the same route.
Well, when it comes to cigarettes, I only have two things to say. Lockdown and Kozazani Dalamizuma. That's all I have to say about that. And we'll leave it there. If you wonder about the illicit cigarette market, why it flourished, that's exactly why. It was already there, and it just mushroomed during that period. It's horrible. A lot of people look. I used to not invest in tobacco stocks. I don't smoke. I find cigarettes. I can't stand them. But I do invest in Altria, and because they sell them to the Chinese, and keep selling to the Chinese. Keep making me money, man. Keep making me money. Chinese can buy all our tobacco. I don't care. Anyway, but I don't own British American tobacco, but I do own Altria. But yeah. So Dawie, let me see. I had a couple more notes here before we wrap up. Let me see what. Covered that already. We didn't really talk about BE that much. Can we get into that a little bit? I mean, I think that's a major break.
BE.
Yeah, I think it's a major break from my perspective, and I'll get your feedback on it. I think it's a major break.
Okay, let me give you a very good example. BE stands for Black Economic Empowerment. And we've got all sort of laws in South Africa that require you to basically give away part of your assets if you want to do business. Now, one example is that we've got fairly good internet in South Africa, but the rural areas quite often do not have internet at all. And Elon Musk, which is South African born, as you know, Elon Musk, he wanted to give us access to his Starlink network, but according to South Africa's legislation, you have to have 30% black ownership of your company before you're allowed to operate in a telecommunications sector in South Africa. And Elon Musk said no. Now, the real irony here is that in the rural areas where you can't get, and quite often can't get access to internet whatsoever, it's mostly black and poor black people living in the rural areas. And because Elon Musk is not prepared to give away 30% of his company, now he's not going to provide cheap, reliable internet access to poor rural black people. And it's the rural black people that's going to lose out here because some cronies and some politically connected blacks are not prepared to give Elon Musk access to that market, because unless he gives 30% of his company away to those well-connected, politically connected blacks. So that's an example of black economic empowerment in South Africa. I can tell you, we've got a business in the financial services industry, and there are many requirements in terms of race that we have to adhere to. We have to draw up and provide information about the racial composition of our company, not only us, all sort of companies in South Africa. You're only allowed to buy from certain other companies that got a certain rating. We've got a certain BEE rating that is also legislated and enforced on you. If you want to do business with the state, you typically you must be a black-owned company or owned by black women, preferably, or especially black women with some sort of disability. Those are the requirements. And then you can get a contract from the state. And quite often what happens is that somebody with even a white company, say, for example, will be approached by a black company somewhere, and they will buy from the white company and sell on to the state at a much inflated price, of course. And we, the taxpayers, of course, need to pay for that in the end. So BEE is one of those major reasons why it's become so extremely expensive to do business in South Africa. And of course, there's so much corruption involved in the whole system.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's part of the problem here. It's really a major issue. And it all comes back to what you talked about early in our conversation. And by the way, there's a few people in the chat moaning about, "Oh, Chris, quit interrupting your guest." It's a conversation. I'm not Newsroom Africa interviewing somebody. We're having a conversation. That's why it's called the Indaba conversation. And today's conversation with Dawie Roodt. Dawie's interrupted himself. He's interrupted me. I've interrupted him. Get over yourselves. Good Lord. This is the conversation. Does Dawie, do you look, are you upset, Dawie? No, we're having a conversation, right?
Yeah, no. I see, I've interrupted you a couple of times and I see it works fine.
Exactly. Some people need to get over themselves. But anyway, yeah, so it all comes back to what you talked about early in this conversation. And that is, we have a political problem. We have political leaders that, as I describe, are concerned about three things: self-enrichment, self-aggrandizement, and craven political power to further the first two. Not all, but most. And that's the mathematical problem. We have to get rid of the most at the polling and put more dedicated, patriotic, honest people in office, whether it's here or it's on that side of the Atlantic. That's what's undermining, because people are being oppressed by laws that hurt everyone. Look, the BEE laws hurt entrepreneurs. They hurt white South Africans immensely, Indians, colors, but they also hurt black South Africans. I think you touched on it a few moments ago. It hurts everybody. When you don't allow someone like Elon Musk the space to succeed in your country because of their skin pigmentation, whether it was under the National Party or under the ANC, you harm everybody. Imagine if Elon Musk was building Teslas in South Africa. Oh my goodness. Every part in the Tesla's made in America. Every part could be made in South Africa. The thousands and then the tens of thousands of jobs rely on that. So, we got to get rid of the politicians. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And, I know, I think ideologically you and I are more or less on the same side when it comes to the economy, or I guess politics and so on. But you've got a couple of wacko politicians in your country as well, saying that you have to do something about inequality. I do not have a problem with inequality. In fact, I always ask this question, and there's something else that I also want to mention, but let me just make this point. I always ask this question, so Bill Gates, how many people did he make poor? Or Elon Musk, how many people did he make poor? All the other very successful people, business people, they didn't make anybody poor. They became wealthy, fabulously wealthy, but in the process, nobody became poor. Everybody became wealthy. Maybe they've got much wealthier. But coming back, about one of the first things Donald Trump did was to stop this US aid funding to South Africa as well. Not only to South Africa, many other countries in the world.
The whole world.
Not only in South Africa, but about a month or so ago, I was invited to do, recently, I was invited to do a talk at an NGO in a city called Bloemfontein in the Free State. And they were recipients of US aid for AIDS. I can't remember exactly what it was, but for people with AIDS and so on. So I got there and I did my talk, and the reason why they asked me is because they get people to pay money to come and listen to me, which I still can't figure out why they would do that. But that's how they had a business breakfast and people would pay money and listen to me. And then I asked the lady that organized this, and I asked her a question. I said, so the Americans give us all this money to help us with the fighting AIDS and help very poor people and so on with AIDS and so on. So I asked her this question. So when is the last time that you thanked the Americans? Have you ever thanked the Americans? But everybody is criticizing the Americans, but the Americans don't need to give us money for anything. And I mean, the least that you can do is send a very nice letter to the American taxpayer and say, listen, thank you very, very much for the money that you've given us.
Yeah.
And they couldn't answer me that. When's the last time we thank
Because
the
they
Americans?
because they don't, Dawie. Look, I lived in Botswana, and we put a lot of money in Botswana for HIV. Not nearly as much as South Africa, obviously, because the number's different. But every project that I went to, the people responsible for the project, those who benefited from it, went out of their way to thank us. And not just when the ribbon was cut, because we have an obligation to follow up, make sure the projects are still functional and still operating a year, 2, 3, 5 years later. I would go back and check on projects. I went to a Catholic school where we built some of the classrooms because there were kids there who were orphans from HIV. And I went there, and the Catholic nuns, apparently my predecessors hadn't been doing their job properly. I hadn't been there in 5 years. So I went there, and they're like, and I went my fatigues, like, why are you here, sir? Well, because we have an obligation to make sure it's going well. Can you show me the classrooms? I'd like to see them. And they were just amazed. But everywhere I went in Botswana, every time we did something, and even when we weren't doing an event related to HIV, we'd have the 4th of July celebration. The South African president at the time was Ian Khama, or the foreign minister. They would come and they would always say, we are immensely grateful for the American people, for what they do for Botswana, helping us become, through our own efforts, but your support, become a middle-income country and alleviate poverty. I never hear that anywhere in South Africa. Now, I'm sure people do thank, but never from people that matter or should matter. But in Botswana, you always hear it.
But you get a lot of criticism for.
Look at Malema calling us racist because we ended foreign aid. It's our money, dude. Get your Breitling watches and Land Cruisers from someone else. You're white monopoly capitalists. You're not getting it from us anymore. Good Lord. Anyway, no, it's amazing the ingratitude of the world. $8.1 billion. The president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, which was created in 2003. I was there at the outset in D.C. when this was created, and we had the gay community in America, not all of it, but some of the activists whining about it. It's not fair. 1/3 of the money has to be spent on prevention. I'm like, shut up. The U.S. government has spent $640 million on HIV from 1983 until today, 2003. 20 years. They spent $640. They just promised to spend $3 billion a year, and 1/3 of it goes to prevention. So what? So you get books that say abstinence, be faithful, and condomize. You got $2 billion for treatment and prevention. Just deal with it. Deal with it. And go buy your condoms. Anyway, so that wound up being $15 billion for 5 years. It was $45 billion. They gave so much money to that program, and 85% of the beneficiaries of our PEPFOR money are in Africa. And most of them are in Southern Africa. And the ingratitude is astounding. To be called racist, to be told our president is the leader of a global white supremacy because somebody's feelings are hurt because a gravy train is over. This program was supposed to last 5 years, Dawie. 5 years. We funded it for 22 years. Now, the way it was terminated is probably a bit unfair. My video just switched over. I think somebody might have taken over my stream. But the way that it was terminated was a bit unfair, and it was short notice, and there's a legitimate complaint about that. But to complain that we're turning off money as if it's owed to people is utter nonsense. Utter nonsense.
Agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, so there you go. It's something weird just happened in my Zoom session. We just switched on the screen. I don't know how that happened. That's weird. Let me come back to the speaker and see what happens there. Okay, let me switch it back. Never seen that happen before. Anyway, well, no, I'm still on the wrong side. Anyway, so we switched sides. So, Dawie, listen, this has been a really enjoyable conversation for me. I hope you found it insightful, too. One thing you don't know about me, though, you love agriculture. What you don't know is I was a dairy farmer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've got some really world-class dairy farmers here in South Africa, and they've got the technology is absolutely astonishing. They even play music to the cows. Can you believe that?
I can't believe it. They produce much more milk when they're comfortable. We used to play classical music in the barn. We were a small scale dairy farm, about 17 acres. Had Jerseys and Guernseys, mostly all Jerseys, couple Guernseys, and we sold milk for $1, $1.25 a gallon when the supermarkets were selling it for $3 or $4 a gallon. It was fantastic. We made money. We weren't rich, but made enough to get by and pay for the cost of the vet bills and the feed bills and and all that stuff, and a little bit to live off of. But we also sold butter because the high butterfat content. So what that taught me, and I was doing that in high school, what that taught me, and we lived in poverty then. I mean, before we had the cows, there was times I didn't have meals. We went without meals. We talk about abject poverty. We didn't have plumbing. I used an outdoor privy to go to the bathroom, an outhouse, and fetch water from a cistern. So when I talk to people in Uganda about poverty, and they look at me and somebody in uniform, and this tall, devastatingly handsome white guy from overseas, and like, how can you relate to us? Well, I've lived some of your experiences, believe it or not. But I learned a lot about business and being responsible and being responsible for something just by being a dairy farmer. It's a tough business. I'd never do it. It's 365 days a year. There's no vacation for dairy farmers.
Yeah, the cows need to be milked twice a day. Let me just say, agriculture, I've got 4 industries that I really like. One is agriculture, because it's becoming a corporate business, and I like that, and there's a lot of technological changes happening there. The second one is education. That's an industry I really like, because of technological changes. And today it's possible for poor countries to give their kids world-class skills development. The third one that I really do like is, let's call it personalized medicine. And there are all sort of things happening there. And I'm very, very excited about that. And the fourth one is finance. Those are the 4 industries that I like. And there's a lot of overlap. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing quite often. But those are the 4 industries. And I think when you talk about finance, there are some dramatic changes happening in the world of money. I love money. As an economist, I think money was perhaps the single most important economic break, the single most important discovery in the world of economics. And money is again going through a major change, and this so-called crypto monies, and we're probably going to see things like central bank digital currency soon, and other forms of private sector currencies and so on. But anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make. 4 major industries that I really do like.
Well, I'm with you on the finance industry. I'm with you on agriculture. I'm with you on pretty much all those. Education is a huge market in America. It's a big moneymaker for a lot of people, and it could be in South Africa as well. I mean, look what AfReform and Solidarity have done with Soltech and with academia. They've set these institutions up, and they're functioning. They built them on time, under budget, at least for Soltech. Academia isn't finished yet. They're still using a lease facility. But these institutions are out there, and it shows what can be done in the private sector. And there's a huge market for in South Africa, particularly when the state schools have such low expectation of students. You want your kids to be able to become HVAC technicians, high voltage, alternating current. You want them to become coders. You want them to be successful as plumbers. And you need tech schools. You need academic schools that actually meet those standards. Anyway, Dawie, I always give my guests a chance to get the last word in here. Anything they want to say, if you got something positive to say about any of the stuff we talked about today, or if you got something negative to say, you're welcome to say that too. But I always give the floor to my guests at the end, a chance to share any thoughts about what's going on. If we're talking about the markets plummeting, I'm telling people to take a deep breath. That's the nature markets. Stock markets are not the real economy. They can affect the real economy by causing fear and, panic, but they're not the real economy. But if you're a patient, wise investor who has time, then you might see some buying opportunities. But I think that what's happening has got a lot of people on edge.
Okay, let me just say something about the U.S. economy. Now, I follow the U.S. economy quite closely, obviously for obvious reasons. And I've been predicting recessions in the U.S. economy for the last couple of years. It hasn't happened yet. And there are reasons why I said that. I mean, like, for example, the yield curves and so on. I'm pretty sure the U.S. economy is going to slow down now. There is some corrections. I think the U.S. it's become really too hot, the U.S. economy. Your fiscal accounts it's a major problem. You need to address that. Your debt levels are too high. You must address that. You can't. Debt is important, and it's important to have if you've got a reserve currency to have a liquid and a relatively big debt market. But your debt is getting out of hand, so you must do something about that. I'm pretty sure the economy is going to slow down. I'm not so sure it's going to go into a recession, but it is going to be a slowdown. But the thing that I like about the U.S. economy, the cycle, the U.S. economy, the cycle in the U.S. economy is extremely short. In the past, you had this long cycles. You get economic growth and then a slowdown and then a recession and then the economy. That's not happening anymore. We got rid of the cycle. The economic cycle does not apply to the U.S. anymore. They get into recessions or into correction, if you like, and out of that very, very quickly. And the innovation and the technological progress and all of that, the U.S. economy is just an economy that I think it's the most amazing place. And it is because you allow individuals to do what they can do best. We're going to make a plan in South Africa. We're going through a transition phase politically and economically. We've done immense damage to the South African economy the past 30 years or so. I think we're in the process of getting rid of the ANC. We've got some serious obstacles ahead of us. We're also running into some debt problems. The South African economy is really underperforming. There's so much potential in South Africa. And I believe that South Africans will make the right decision eventually. And we will get rid of the ANC as well. And I think the biggest the big middle ground of South Africans are people that really do want this country to succeed, to be successful, and we can really do that. So please, from my side, I would really ask the Americans, if you want to punish South Africans, don't punish all South Africans. Make sure that you punish the bad guys, the guys that cause all this damage to us and is still causing a lot of damage to South Africa. And please don't do it to all South Africans. And you can, because you're big and strong. But try to support us in a way that we can sort of, get this economy back up and start running again and start growing again.
Well, Dawie, I think that the intent by people in Congress is not by the Trump administration. We don't see any threats from Trump of the sanctions or any harm to South Africa's economy. The only thing is they suspended the aid and offered the refugee program. That might change with, Ibrahim Rasool's conduct, with Fikile Mabalula's comments and Paul Mashatile's comments and a bunch of other, like Sika Leila on the NEC, the nonsense are saying, not to mention Julius Malema, who threatened the life of Donald Trump. The Secret Service is aware of that now. That was an unwise move. If Juju thinks he can't be hurt because of his comments, he might want to try using his credit card or flying to London soon. He might not be able to do that. Anyway, but a dumb mistake threatening the president's life. Anyway, so, there's a lot that's being done, but it's not coming from the Trump administration at the moment. We have members of Congress talking sanctions, and they're talking about the people responsible, like in Zimbabwe, not the country. So I think that's a good sign. Hopefully we won't see this, but there is something that's not going to be undone. Until this is sorted out with the tariffs, and right now nobody from the ANC or from the South African government can get an office call with people in DC. I mean, if I worked for the South African embassy in Washington, I'd probably have a hard time getting an Uber right now, let alone an appointment with the White House. And that's a key concern. They either need to get people with reason in their mind, maybe someone like you or Tony Leon or somebody who can actually talk to DC to go over and represent the government and say, hey, look, we're sorry. We'd like to talk now, get rid of these tariffs. What can we do to sort this out? Because that's not happening. Until it happens, that 30% tariff isn't going to go anywhere. And that needs to go away. But the other issue here that is going to hurt your economy long term, particularly your auto industry, is AGOA. I mean, before this whole situation right now with South Africa, AGOA was already on the ropes. It's been renewed every year since 2000 for 5 years, and this year it was due for renewal. And the Trump administration and the Republican Congress weren't too hip to it because they don't get the soft power. And I understand where they're coming from. I lived in Africa for decades with AGOA, and we did great things for Africa and got no appreciation for it and get attacked all the time when we're giving people duty-free access. And, what's the point if people are going to crap on you? We wanted economies to grow in Africa, and we wanted countries to respect human rights and property rights. And what does the ANC do? They pass an Expropriation Without Compensation Act, which violates AGOA. So, they legally aren't even allowed. South Africa's not even legally allowed to be in AGOA right now. And Trump hasn't kicked you out. But now with the 30% tariff, you're de facto kicked out. So I think AGOA is going to die this year, unfortunately. So that advantage will disappear. So that's something South Africa's producers are going to have to adjust to, no matter what the circumstances are. But I worry about South Africans because it's black, white, and brown South Africans who be ones that suffer, not the caters. They'll still have their BMW 735s and their blue lights ramming through the roads, running over pedestrians, and they'll still sit in their nice houses in Sandton, and they'll sit in their nice houses in the Western Cape, and they won't suffer. And that's the sad thing.
I'm afraid.
Yeah. All right. Cool beans. All right, Dawie, Roodt, it's been a real pleasure. Bye bye, donkey. Ke alaboa for your time. And I wish you enjoyable time for the rest of your sojourn there at an undisclosed location somewhere near a beautiful spot in South Africa.
Bye, donkey. Bye, donkey. Chris, it was really nice talking to you, and all the best to you.
All right. Cheers. All right. We'll catch you again sometime.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye. All
right, folks. That was Dawie Roodt, economist from South Africa. And he's trying to work his way out there. I'll help him out. And we'll put him in the waiting room there. Whoops, there we go. He got himself there. All right. Well, there you go. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the broadcast today. We had a very large audience for quite a bit of time for this. I hope you found it interesting. I am a little dismayed at the commentary that went on there. I don't know why people have to be disrespectful. If you disagree with someone, that's fine. But, it's no reason to be rude and disrespectful. People are rude to me all the time. I mean, I'm the host. I get it. Also, it's a conversation, folks. People interrupt each other. Do you sit around the braai and wait for the person who's talking to spend 20 minutes talking, or do you interrupt them when you got to get appointed? It's a conversation, okay? That's why it's called the Indaba conversation, okay? So, yeah, anyway. But, thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thanks for those who gave it a like. We got 1,000 likes out of 12,000 people watched. That's a little disappointing. We could have got more, but thank you all for it. A lot of people complaining about money. Well, I didn't complain about money. I got $1.83 in super chat revenue. Obviously, I don't do this for the money. I don't do this for the money. Look, you can disagree with people. That's fine. But I'm very grateful he came on. It was an interesting conversation. You see that we didn't agree on everything. I pushed back on a few things. He pushed back on a few things with me. But he's a pretty smart guy, knows what he's doing, and he invests money for the benefit of the people who, who send their money to him to make money and grow it. So we had 12,715 people who watched this. The live stream peak was a total of 2,213 people simultaneously here. So there you go. All right. Thanks, guys. Did Mr. Roodt say that the people who want to go are not very successful? He may have, Antoinette, but again, what do you care? I mean, I'm not trying to argue with you. What's the point? This is what Willem Petzer said. People love Willem Petzer to death. He said that in front of the American Embassy. We've heard AfriForum and Solidarity say that. People love them. Some people don't love them. Look, I think it's a mistake for people to assume that only poor, destitute people are the ones who are going to come. That's nonsense. A lot of people who are just frustrated and have had enough of things, even though they are culturally aligned to South Africa and it's their home, will take advantage of this program. People who are wealthy. It will happen. I mean, the argument that no one who's wealthy or successful in South Africa will leave South Africa is nonsensical. Now, I don't recall him saying that, but I was dealing with trolls in the chat because my moderators weren't spanking the trolls. So when he said that, I missed that comment. And that's why I was taken aback by people responding to it in a very rude fashion. So back to your question there. If he said that, that's something I would have disagreed with him and I would have pushed back. And the reason I say that is because, ladies and gentlemen, I know better. If wealthy South Africans aren't going to leave South Africa, then please explain to me why over 1.5 million, 2.5 million South Africans are living abroad right now. The most of them that left were wealthy people. They left in 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. The wealthy people left. A lot of them left. A long time ago. So why would they not take advantage of the golden ticket to come to the best country in the world where entrepreneurialism flourishes? They will. They will. So, yeah, that's an attitude or view, and I don't know that Dawie said that, I missed that, but that's an attitude or view that I think is very much foolhardy and mistaken. And that's why I raised the issue about the flight of human capital that could be devastating in South Africa. I don't think he implied that. I don't think we really unpacked it, Anthony. You said, does he imply that people boot out of government do the affirmative action, they try to create their own business? No, I don't. I think you're reading something into what he said. Maybe I misheard him. But what I take from that is what I've always taken from that. The civil service people were kicked out because of their race, because they were Afrikaners. But let's be fair. Many of them were in government and they were bureaucrats because they were Afrikaners, and the National Party favored its patrons class, which was Afrikaners. Now, the difference is the Afrikaners were favored and patrons, by and large, in the National Party era, were competent. And they were effective at what they did. The difference in the ANC era is that the patrons network goes to incompetent, illiterate fools in many cases, and they've destroyed everything. So, but both the National Party and the ANC were patrons machines. They took care of their favored crowd. In the case of the National Party, it was Afrikaners primarily. In the case of the ANC, it's Caters, who are black. So, yeah, but I know a lot of white South Africans were forced out of government and had no choice. One of the things that happened to the Afrikaner community in South Africa, which we haven't talked about in this conversation, which I've talked about previously, is because you were pushed out of government, because you were pushed out of the big state-owned parastatals, you had to survive. And in previous years, before the current dispensation we're looking at now in South Africa, this promulgation of all these laws, you could succeed by starting a business. But now they're destroying that, and you can't survive by having a business. So a lot of Afrikaners became entrepreneurs, something they weren't accustomed to doing in the past. And that was good for Afrikaners. But what's happened now has been bad. So I think that we've covered that, okay? All right. We don't all live in gated communities. Well, yeah. A lot of forum fights on my broadband. Okay, a lot of white South Afrikaners losing businesses on a database due to increased price. Yes, Van, I know. And I talk about it endlessly. Kara says, by the way, Van, you just gave a massive super chat. I had the super chat, the chat thing turned off so it wouldn't interrupt because you're giving out so many memberships. Thank you for that. I think it says you gave 150 memberships. Wow, that's crazy. Thank you so much. Here's the alert box is back on if anybody wants a super chat now. Thank you for that amazing super chat, Van. It was 1,400 Rand. Thank you for that. Get a coffee. I shall. What's going on here? Hang on a second. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay. All right. So, and then Tony Nage gave 10 Canadian dollars, a little cream for the coffee. Thank you for that. Karen Menard says thanks. Renell says thank you. Love to like this chat, says Pied Crow. And ANC, white people want out of South Africa. And then, yep, Colonel, they are trying to get rid of the beard. Are they? Well, in order to get rid of the beard, you got to get me to 100,000 subscribers. And we're a long way from that, folks. We're a long way from 100,000. We are at 70,676. So we're not quite there yet. Last night's video, I had to delete several of the songs because I was blocked on 4 occasions. I didn't get copyright strikes, but I got blocked for the songs I played last night. Deported in 1988 from the UK, says Johan Dutoy. I can only imagine what the reason was for. Business owner, the business model is impossible. It's like running a brick wall. Growth is too slow. Agreed, and agreed 100%. And that STEM starts with BE and it runs downhill from there. The infrastructure, the workforce, all the labor unions, all the stuff. Charmaine says, keep the beard. Make beards great again. Yeah, up 700 from this morning, and I haven't even produced any videos today. There's Van just gave 350 rand. Do your taxes. I was going to do another stream after this. You want me to do my taxes? Left 3 times in other countries. We're not South Africa. It's not easier elsewhere. They're just new problems. I don't know about that, PK. I've lived in 16 foreign countries, and some countries are far easier to live in than others. Every country's got its challenges. But yeah, so just keep it in mind. Anyway, so lots of Burmese like men with beards, says Yolandi Smith. Ashley Engelbrecht, welcome to you. Anyway, no news live stream next. Are you saying no, do the news, or no, don't do the news? What are you saying, Endo? Please do a stream, Chris. Okay, you guys want me to do a stream now for the news. Not now. We're going to end this. This has to end because I've got this running in Zoom. It's going to be a 5 gigabyte file. I can't have a file that big. Leaving for better dating prospects, says Ananda. We're going to start buramaisionly.com. I'm going to go register that domain, buramaisionly.com. Rian says Afrikaans music is illegal in the USA. No, it's not. No, it's not. Okay, I will do the news, but it's not set up. It is now 2 o'clock. Give me till 2:15. That's about 24 minutes, all right? Then I'll do the news. Okay? Okay? Where's my cowboy Dan? Yeah. What South Africa is doing to whites is wrong, but I do believe a lot of people, including whites, are responsible for their own misfortune. Well, that's a very open-ended statement there, Fabian. A very open-ended statement there. What's 5 gig for a person with 100 terabyte brain capacity? You're underselling me, man. I've got petabytes of brain capacity. Okay, cool beans. All right. Most of us can't get ahead because of the rules. It's just, what does that not mean? Yeah, no, Marissa, I'm not arguing that. R1 is doing his taxes. Good on you, man. Leaving for safety and opportunity. All right, folks, we're going to do a news broadcast, and we'll chat after this. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks. Be sure to hit the like button. We're up to 1,200 likes, 13,429 watched. Excellent. So thank you to my guest, Dawie Roodt. Appreciate you being here. All right, you guys be well, and we'll be back on in just a few minutes. All right, cheers.